Now, this is going to blow your mind too here. Let's just keep going. So,
Sure. No worries. Thanks.
so in Isaiah 13, verse 3, the only way you'll see it is if you read the Septuagint version, which is the Greek version that Jesus and the disciples read. Paul quotes it more than any other. The Septuagint is the Old Testament translated into Greek. And so when the New Testament writers are writing in Greek, they're quoting the Septuagint version versus the Hebrew version. But in Isaiah 13:3, it says, this is God speaking about the time of the judgment. This is the time of the tribulation. He says, I myself have commanded my giants and have summoned my Gibberim, my mighty men, to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. It's phrased really weird, but what it's saying is that God is going to release the giants, the Rephaim, their spirits, in the time of the end. And we see in Revelation 9 that you have this host coming out of the pit, coming in the form of what looked like locusts with stingers. And there's an interesting little nugget there that they are allowed to torment mankind for 5 months.
Yeah.
And they're going to wish to die, but they're not going to be able to die. But you think, well, why 5 months? That's kind of weird. Well, it's interesting that if you go back to Genesis 6, that the flood took 5 months to kill them all off, all the Nephilim.
Why did you have to go there?
I know, you're like, well, that's kind of an interesting coincidence. So I think Revelation 9 absolutely is the Nephilim spirits, those that were bound, those that were in the abyss. Remember, the other ones that are free in the time of the Gospels, they said, don't send us there. And Jesus said, okay, I won't, because there was others that were already there. These ones are released to torment mankind. But going back to your other question, is the Antichrist a Nephilim? I would say yes, but because of the nature of humanity, in that when angelic beings in the time of the flood mated with human women, they produced giants. Well, we can't assume that would happen today. Well, why? Because there's a book out there written by Dr. John Sanford called Genetic Entropy. That mankind, we are at the tail end of our species. Our DNA is mutated. We're at the tail end of surviving because there's so many mutations and cancers now. If you go back to before the flood or Adam and Eve, they had great genetics, but through mutations built up over generations now, we're pretty contaminated. And so if you have an angelic being mating with a modern human, it might not produce a giant because we have bad DNA now, and we know that. I mean, we're sick. And especially if you look at, as we know, people who marry somebody too close to them, family-wise, that's why you don't marry your cousin or your sister.
Right.
Because the genetics are there. There's a greater chance of them coming together and producing a very bad birth defect. So in his book, he talks about, hey, we're at the end of our species. So when the Antichrist comes, based on Genesis 3:15, God says to Satan, your seed there's going to be a battle between your seed and her seed. We know that Eve's seed is Jesus. Now, is that figurative or is that literal? Well, it's literal. Jesus is the literal child of Mary, grandson, but he holds that genetics. So I think the word zerah in Hebrew, the word seed, is a reference to something physical. So I think that based on that verse and 2 Thessalonians 2, talking about Satan being a son of perdition, or the Antichrist being a son of perdition, I think Satan is going to come down, mate with a woman, who's probably already happened, I think, and that this coming Antichrist figure is going to be a modern day Nephilim, based on Genesis 3:15 and 2 Thessalonians 2. Absolutely.
So have you ever seen, and I don't recommend anyone to watch it, but I did for research purposes, American Horror Story when they did the apocalypse with the Antichrist? So that would probably interest you. I mean, it's nothing godly. I'm not going to tell you. I did it. I watched the season like with one eye, like I was like this the whole time. But if you just Google it, and if I had time, I would show you. But that's basically, so it's really, you know how they always say that they predictive programming?
Yeah.
Okay. So the, Sandra, I don't know. Can you maybe behind the wall, just Google, American Horror Story, Antichrist, Apocalypse. And there's a scene there with, when they're sitting around a table with all of these elite that their faces are hidden. But anyway, so they had all these bunkers set around the world. And the Antichrist, well, was the Antichrist. But to your point, it goes on the backstory of watching him being birthed. So his mother died during birth. Okay. And again, guys, this is a show. I don't say to watch it. But so the mom died during birth. And from birth, he was very evil, but they didn't know what was happening. And then, I don't know, then it goes deeper into that. So I kind of always thought of something like that as well, that maybe, I don't know. I mean, I have someone coming up where we're going to talk about the Antichrist, that conversation. And one of the questions that one of my listeners wanted to know was, do you think he's around today? So if he is around today and he's a little horn, do you think he's evil? Does he know that he's the Antichrist then?
You know, the Bible doesn't tell us about the awareness, the self-awareness of the Antichrist. I would tend to think that he's probably just selfish and greedy, but we do know I would recommend Ryan Pitterson's book on this, The Final Nephilim, because he takes a different view on Genesis 6 in his first book, The Judgment of the Nephilim.
Okay.
Him and I wouldn't agree on that, but his second book, The Final Nephilim, he does a great job of highlighting all the verses that speak about the hybrid nature of the Antichrist. But one of the things that's interesting in the Bible is in Revelation 13 and other passages that the Antichrist is wounded in Revelation 13, the mortal wound, but he's healed. And then it talks about him coming out of the pit and becoming possessed by Satan himself. Well, we see that the same thing in Luke 22 and John 13, talking about Judas. Judas is the only other one that's called the son of perdition. He's called that in John 17. So you have Judas being the son of perdition, and you have the Antichrist being the son of perdition. Well, you have something, I think, in common. Judas, it says Satan entered him. But before that, he was greedy. He stole money from the purse. He had his own agenda and a variety of things. But there came a point when he basically opened himself up and Satan entered him. So if we were to take that parallel, that's probably the best that we can do scripturally. I would say that the Antichrist has his own agenda. He wants world power. I think he's wicked. He's not he's not sitting in church and then all of a sudden he gets possessed. No, right. He's a man of the world. He's wicked. He's evil. He wants power. He wants glory. And then he comes to the point where he's wounded and he opens himself up and Satan enters him. The dragon enters him. And therefore he would be called the son of perdition and possessed by the out of the pit. He comes out of the pit is what it says. It's really fascinating.
So I found the clip. I have it up on my screen. I know it has nothing to do with our topic, but do you want to see it? Because it's very interesting. And like I said, predictive programming. And I've just always been like, that's probably why I don't watch a lot of shows. All right. So I'm going to share my screen really quick. And I will. So you can see that, yeah? You can hear it?
Esteemed members of the cooperative, world leaders, tech giants, media moguls, and cultural influencers. The rumors you've heard are true. My name is Michael Langdon, and I am the Antichrist. Humanity is at a crossroads. The world as it is today, the poverty, the hunger, the greed and war, it's no longer sustainable. The time has come to wipe the slate clean. Friends, it's time for the apocalypse. I understand your trepidation. But let me remind you that you are here because of the gifts bestowed upon you by my Father. In return, you gave him your immortal souls. He owns you. Therefore, I own you. We speak with one voice, and my demands are his. Now, as you'll see from the handy guide provided by my associate, I do not intend to leave you and your families to die. When fire rains down on the unwashed masses, you and your families will be safely squirreled away in a network of luxury fallout shelters. You already have the resources. You just bought land on New Zealand's South Island. You own half of Bora Bora. The bunker underneath your ranch in Texas could easily fit 20 people. With a little construction and some retrofitting, these sites will make the perfect outposts to ride out the end of the world. And with the admission price of $100 million, only the worthy will gain admission. Turn to page 6.
So that was it. And I don't know, when I watched it, so again, I didn't watch everything in the episode, but he was birthed. So Satan came and impregnated a woman and then birthed. And again, yes, I mean, how can someone be this evil and not be the seed of Satan? So can I be really frank here? And hopefully I can say this. So do angels, that's where I get confused, because we have certain body parts. Mm-hmm. Angels, today, I guess why I'm really confused about all of this. I don't know how to. I know we need to keep it adult, but I don't know how to ask that.
We can do this rated G.
Okay.
In Matthew 22 verse 30, which is often quoted as an objection to the view that these are angels, which will answer your question. Let me just read it so that everybody, maybe if they're following along, they can. It says, he's talking about the future. Jesus is, and he says, for in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. So a lot of people take that and they run with it and say, oh, see, angels can't marry.
Yeah.
It doesn't say they can't marry. And here it's only speaking about the angels in heaven. It's very clear there, but they are like the angels in heaven. It doesn't say that angels cannot take on human form, or because here's why. I'll give you another verse. People like passages. I hope they do.
Yes. And that's the scripture you may be reading, right? Where we've been visited by angels.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Hebrews 13 verse 2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angel unawares. Now, so we have, and let me give another one here. In Genesis 19, going back to the story of the narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah, we know that three guys showed up. And they showed up to talk to Abraham in Genesis 18. One of them was the Lord. The Lord showed up and they ate. I mean, they sat there and they ate. And then the Lord stayed there to talk with Abraham. And this is where Abraham has his debate. Can I do 50? What about 40? What about 35? He's an auctioneer about Sodom. Well, then the two other angels go on in Genesis 19 and they show up. They're physical and they're very handsome. That's why I said that angels can show up and be handsome, because the other men of the city wanted to violate them. But what do? Afterwards, it says they grabbed Lot by the hand. So that means they showed up, they had ears, they had a nose, they had a hand to grab. Did they have other appendages? There's no, if they could show up with ears and fingers, they could show up being fully whatever they wanted. They have the ability to do that. And so to me, what we know is, again, according to the Jude passage, that they have limits, and those angels went beyond their limits. They took on the human form, and they violated. It doesn't say that they can't. It says that the angels in heaven don't.
That's a great point. So how much more time do you have for me?
Well, I'm not going to bed till midnight, so I got lots of
Okay,
time.
perfect. So on that note, we have another 7 hours, guys. No, I'm teasing. All right. So start preparing. I know Sandra's been starring some questions, hopefully from the beginning. Yes, thumbs up. And we'll get some questions over to Mondo. Clearly not me this week because I have no idea. All right. So when we were corresponding back and forth, one of the bullets that I made was when you were talking about Jesus's victory of his non-human enemies. So I think my brain is kind of wrapping around this a little bit better now. But before we get to that, so the archangel is the top notch. So Michael, that's the only time that's referenced in the Bible as him, correct? Do you think that's the only archangel or more?
He's the only one named. I think it would seem to me that the cherub maybe are a little higher than that, the seraphim, because they're directly around God's throne. But you have chief prince and you have archangel, so that's still pretty serious.
So chief prince, isn't that the one who came to visit Daniel?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so Michael the archangel, and then the cherubim, the seraphim. So you said sons of God. That's also watchers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then, so who do you think the other are then?
In Daniel 7, you have you have a court scene, and there you have the Son of Man in Daniel 7:13 coming, appearing, and talking to the Ancient of Days, and then you have the court set. But below that, you have the court, which this is where you have the divine council idea. I think the sons of God, I'm sure Michael is in on that. Gabriel probably too. He's the only other named. They're on this divine council, this watcher council that is given decrees, as we see in Daniel chapter 4. So in Daniel 7, they're sitting there, but below them, you have other angels, servant angels that are attending, thousands upon thousands. So what scholars will talk about, and especially Michael Heiser does a great job in his book, Angels, talking about the different classifications, showing that there are others that are outside of that divine council, sons of God group. Sometimes he'll say that Michael Heiser will say, no, I think they're all part of it. I tend to see it a little bit different, that you have the sons of God divine council group, and then you have other angels that are not part of it, that are messenger angels, which is what the word angel means, or servant angels that are relatively lower in their rank. So we do know there's rank. There's angel and there's archangel. There's prince and there's chief prince. So we don't have all the exact details that we would like, but there is enough information to put at least a generic framework together.
And where do you think the devil sat before Lucifer? Let's just call him by his original name.
Well,
where do you think he sat?
If we take Ezekiel 28 as a reference to, it's talking about the king of Tyre there, but it's clearly talking about the king of Tyre, which was a human, and talking about the power behind the king of Tyre, that being behind him. There, I think that's a reference to Satan. It calls him the anointed cherub, the Mashiach, the Messiah, which is, I think, if anything, Satan was one of the cherubim. We see 4 usually, but he was the 5th one, whatever that might look like. In Revelation 4, you see the 4 living creatures, if that's a reference. But being a cherub, but being anointed, that gives a little higher. So it's possible, if we take all that Satan was at one time the highest ranking created being. That's pretty amazing to have a fall from that.
So do you think, as I do, so Ezekiel and I believe, what's the other passage in Isaiah, correct? That
Isaiah
describe
14.
the devil. So you believe that both of those are a description of
both. It has to be a description of both, because it can't just be the human king and it can't just be Satan. It's obviously referring to him and the power behind it, which is not unknown, certainly in prophetic writing. So I think Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 both are making reference to this one who fell. Ezekiel 28, he was perfect in wisdom, perfect in beauty, anointed cherub. Isaiah 14 describes him as wanting to be like the Most High. He wanted to be above what? The stars. The stars, according to Job 38, were the other people of the divine council. So he wanted to be not only, he didn't want to just satisfied in the divine council. He wanted to be above it. He wanted his throne to be above that. Because in Daniel 7, there were many thrones. And just like for us, see, this is where it comes back. It's so personal. If people could grasp this. In the New Testament, because of the failure under the Old Testament, in the New Testament, for the first time, anybody who follows Jesus, male or female, doesn't matter, is called a son of God. And Romans 8, and we are going to, at the end of time, we are going to be elevated into the divine council to rule and reign as the sons of God, just like the other angelic sons of God are there. And we're going to sit on Jesus's throne. And so we're a part of the whole ruling class now. And interestingly, in 1 Corinthians 6:3, it says, don't you know in the future you're going to judge the world and you're going to judge angels? Most people think that's in reference to Satan. I actually don't, because here's why. So let's say that we're at the sentencing and all the bad angels are there. And there's Satan, there's all the other ones that fell. And we say, okay, Lord, they rebelled. And we give a decree, like Daniel 4. We're part of the group. And we say, sentence to the lake of fire. And then they go to the lake of fire. Okay, I guess our role as judging angels is over, right? We're done.
That's true.
So I'm like, that's not what it's saying. The actual language is that of adjudicating, a governing. And another, I'll blow your mind here again. There's another interesting passage. It comes from Psalm 8, and it also appears in Hebrews chapter 2. And Psalm 8 is wonderful, especially for astronomy, because it says, oh, I look at the heavens, I see the work of your fingers, and I see man. And what is man, the son of man, that you are mindful of him, that you care about him? You have set him, you've given him dominion. You set him over the work of your hands. And he says, now this appears in the Greek Septuagint version, as well as in Hebrews chapter 2. Let me just read it, because I think this is often missed. And I think that people will be like, whoa. I hope people get blown away, because in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 5, Jesus is the perfect human. So this is in reference to him, but it's also in reference to us, because we're humanity. And this is a quote from Psalm chapter 8 talking about humanity. It says,
I'm not there yet. Hold on one second.
Okay. Hebrews
For
chapter
some
2,
reason,
verse 5.
I literally cannot find the book of Psalms. There we go. Okay, so Psalm chapter 8, and then you said what verse?
Well, I'm in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 5.
Hebrews. Oh, okay.
Which is fine, because it's a quote of Psalm 8. People could go there too, but that's fine.
Okay, so you're Hebrews. Okay, so Hebrews. There we go. Okay.
So he says, for it was not to angels that God subjected the world to come, of which we are speaking. It has been testified somewhere, what is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. The key there is verse 7. It says, you have made mankind for a little while lower than angels. What does that mean? That we're only here for a little while, that our destiny is to be elevated to a place, according to 1 Corinthians 6:3, that we are going to adjudicate. We're going to govern angels. It's really strange, the language. And I think that the New Testament is filled. And the reason why, because Paul says it. I mean, you think, Paul, where are you getting this from? We're going to rule over angels. We're going to rule the world. Well, that passage in Psalm 8 says this exact thing, that it's connecting not only the world, but it's connecting angels. And so it's not that we're better than angels. I mean, these are righteous angels, but God is saying, humanity, I have such a destiny for you. If in Ephesians 4:1 says, walk worthy of your calling. You have such a great calling that you're going to be glorified. You're going to be ruling and reigning with Jesus over the world to come. You're going to be elevated to rule and govern angels. I'm not saying we're ruling over Michael. That's where I think there's this other group of angels in Daniel 7, which are more of the servant angels. And this isn't speaking anything negative about them. They're good. It's just a matter of function in God's universal rulership. And he's saying, hey, we're made a little lower for a while. And then we're exalted to our place of being children of God into the divine council. That's why so much in the book of Revelation 2 and 3, Jesus says, hey, you're going to rule with me. You're going to reign with me. You're going to sit on my throne. We're going to rule the world. And you have all this rulership language. And that's why in Romans 8, Paul is saying the creation itself is under this curse. It's groaning. And what is it waiting for? It's waiting for the revealing of what? The sons of God. Those aren't angels. Those are us. Yeah. So if we could just understand what God has called us to, we would be far less inclined to get entrenched in sin and stupid things and worldly things, as Paul says in Colossians. Set your mind on things above, not on things on earth. Don't get caught up into greed and into selfish ambition. Don't you know what you're destined for? You are being exalted at the end with your glorified state because of Jesus, not because of anything we've done. But it goes on to say Jesus is going to rule and reign, and it says Jesus is bringing us in to rule and reign with him.
So at that point when Jesus rules and reigns, because I know in the eternal state, that's totally different than the millennial kingdom. But so during that time, are angels literally physically going to be present on earth or only in the eternal state?
Don't know. Yeah.
Because we don't have a new heaven yet. So I was under the assumption that they're really not down with us yet. It's just Jesus' show, so to speak.
If you look I'm scanning the Bible in my mind as it relates to the millennium, because we do know Hebrews 1:14 that the angels are they're ministers, they're spirits to serve those who will inherit salvation. There are those servant angels that are working on God's behalf, on our behalf, because of God's direction. But will they be behind the scenes still? Don't know. Bible doesn't give an answer. It's leaving it mysterious. I wish we had more information.
Okay. So did we answer Jesus' victory over his non-human enemies? I think I digressed with that video because I wanted you to see that.
Let me read 1 Peter 3:19. Okay. Because this is where it appears. And I love context. So I'll read in verse 18. It says, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely." So, number one, context. Jesus went, and some versions will say preached. The word is keruso in the Greek. It doesn't, we think preached like, oh, I preached the gospel to get him saved. That is not what it's saying. This is the ESV. The ESV nails it. Jesus went and proclaimed to these spirits in prison. Well, what spirits? It tells us the context. These were the ones that disobeyed in the time of Noah. So if we look at spirits, which angels are spirits who can take on human or take on physical bodies, corporeal bodies. I think Jesus went to these angels because this is 1 Peter. If we go to 2 Peter, same guy, he's talking about the angels in Tartarus in this prison down there. And Jesus just he's over there in the good side of Hades, Abraham's bosom. He goes across the gulf, goes over to the angels and said, "Hey guys, you lost. Yeah. Your attempts at trying to corrupt humanity back in the time of Noah, with the Nephilim producing all this, trying to corrupt humanity's seed, because Genesis 6:9 says Noah was perfect in his genealogy. He wasn't corrupted by hybrids or anything else. And the word there, perfect, is tamim. It's the same word that's used in the book of Leviticus as it relates to a physical animal. A lamb has to be tamim, has to be perfect. It has to be unblemished. It's a physical characteristic. In the same way, Noah was perfect. So Jesus comes over, he's resurrected. He comes down, he's down there 3 days. His spirit goes over and says, "Hey guys, I won. I'm getting out of here in 3 days. You're not. And he proclaimed his victory. And that's why in 1 Corinthians 2:8, there's several verses that come to mind. It says that if they would have known, if the arche, the rulers, which is the same word for demonic and spiritual entities in Ephesians chapter 6, it says if they would have known, they would have never crucified the Lord of glory. And in Colossians 2:15, it says that Jesus triumphed over his enemies, making a public spectacle of them. God outsmarted them. And so Jesus goes in 1 Peter 3:19 and says to them, you guys tried, but you lost, and I won.
Yeah, the NASB, I read from the 1995 edition. So in that same passage, it says he went and made proclamation to the spirits. And I don't know if you read that in the ESV, but it says now in prison. And that kind of put a little red bulb in my head too, because that word now means, well, where were they before?
Right. They're still in prison. That
also solidifies what you said. If it's a now, could this be the same that we're referring to?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I can talk to you for hours on this, but I know my people have questions.
Okay.
Because this was really, I don't think I'm on the fence anymore. I really don't. And I feel like you've given me a lot to work with here. I mean, Genesis in itself did, but everything that's I've been writing feverishly here. And, I'm going to do a deep dive because I believe we are living in some really, I think that's why when you read the account of the last days, and I'm probably going to upset everybody in this chat right now, the last days for the rapture is not so much the earthquakes and everything happening around us. Israel is the main sign, of course, but Timothy gives us a clear picture of what the last days are going to look like. Lawlessness and lovers of self. To me, those are the signs, really. But when I read that passage and then I am marinating on our conversation tonight, Mondo, it's like the lawlessness, everything that's growing. I mean, we're watching so much. I mean, the news is happening at such a rapid pace. I mean, it feels like just 7 years ago when people were protesting, shout your abortion, which to me was very demonic. So if we're looking at how the world is getting worse, I don't know if these people are possessed, but I do believe there's a lot of demonic possession happening around the planet right now. I don't know how else to explain that because I know Jeremiah 17:9 says, right, that our heart is deceptively wicked. Who can understand it? I get that. But I don't think someone just wakes up one morning. Are we sinful people? Absolutely. That's why Christ went to Calvary. I get that. But I don't think someone, even just some normal person who's not saved is going to be like so debased in their mind. And I just feel like after listening to this conversation, I'm going to look at people a little differently now and be like, I think they're a Nephilim.
Or at least, so that's good because in 1 Timothy 4, it says in the latter days, many will depart from the faith and give heed to seducing spirits or doctrines of demons. Well, that's doctrines of Nephilim. It's the same idea. It's wickedness. It's evil. It's unclean. And we know in Revelation 9, God, it's amazing that people, it says they will not repent of their drug use, of their sorceries, their pharmakeia, and that they worshiped demons. Revelation 9:20 and 21. Yeah. They're going to be worshiping the demons. They're going to be worshiping the dragon. They're going to be worshiping the beast. There are no atheists in the tribulation.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. There are no atheists. They are worshiping the dragon and all of his evil empire.
I know that's why when people say the mark of the beast is forced, I'm like, no, it's not. They're pledging allegiance. They're literally taking that, saying, I will follow after the beast. I mean, they're not being forced to take that. So Sandra, if you want people to get up there and then we can start preparing for questions. You've been great. I mean, it was honestly a pleasure to meet you in Orlando. You took so much time out. And I don't know if anyone's ever been to a prophecy conference. It was my very first one. But I guess I went to the granddaddy of them all, apparently. I don't know. But there was a lot of people that I really did not know because I do have my little circle. And again, I had seen you, I feel like it was a couple of times on Pablo's show. And, but JB, he's been on here. There's just so many things about JB where I was just like, I'm not sold yet. But I would rather be someone who is on the fence and be honest with someone because I want to learn. And if I'm always like, oh yeah, I agree, I'm not going to have any room for, because people are like, oh, well, you can't say that, you might offend them. I'm like, well, I'm okay with that, because I want to learn, and I want them to know, like, hey, I'm not understanding it. He had to convince me about, geoengineering, which, modifying the weather. I don't know. I'm still on the fence. He totally convinced me, and I'm probably going to lose more subscribers, about President Trump. So that was an eye-opening thing that I really had to just really pay attention to, right? I think any politician today, are they really for the American people? Maybe 1%. Yep. They don't care about us. I feel like I just had the Michael Jackson song in our head. They don't care about us. Okay. So anyway, I think, you've gave me a lot to dive into. And if you haven't already, guys, I know there's a lot of people here who follow you. So I know, but if you have not, and if you don't know who this is Mondo, and he is from Prophecy Watchers. So head over there, prophecywatchers.com. So much information. If I can get a thumbs up in the chat, that would be great, that you guys got a lot out of this. If anyone is on the fence like me, and now you're like, wow, because I truly now, this is what I meant to ask you too. So this is where I get confused. When you're reading the Bible, sons of God is mentioned in different contexts. So how would you know? I know to read it. I guess I just answer my own question, but I still get confused. Like, how do I know what sons of God they're talking about? There's
two things. One is to absolutely make a distinction between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I mean, we, unfortunately, which is probably a good thing, we read the Bible as a whole, as we should, but yet we also fail to understand that the Old Testament has a theology to it that's very specific. It's Hebrew. It's written in Hebrew. When you come to the New Testament is it's using a different language, and it kind of has some different emphases. But if people want to look at the phraseology, sons of God, it's very simple. That phrase only appears in Genesis 6 and Job 1:2 and Job 38. That is it. And again, Psalm 89, there's a little one there. There's one other place that it appears is in the book of Hosea, chapter 1, verse 10. But there it says the sons of the living God. So it's not the exact same phrase. So when you're doing deep theology, you don't take something that's close enough. That's not the way theology works. Theology is very precise. And in the New Testament, when you come to the New Testament and it talks about the sons of God, it's using it different than the Old Testament. It's not speaking about angels. It's speaking under a New Testament theological, New Covenant theology, post-Jesus understanding, Jesus being the Son of God. Romans 8, Paul has this phraseology. Paul quotes Hosea 1 about being sons of the living God, especially in the book of Romans. So the main thing is when you do theology, you say, first of all, what is being written in the book, like the book of Romans? Well, Paul is different than Peter, and Peter uses language. He'll use some phrases that are different than how Paul uses them very precisely. So you have that thing. And then you go, well, then how does this compare with what the Old Testament says? You go, well, in the Old Testament, who's writing it? Remember, Rephaim means something different in Moses in the first 5 books than it does in Isaiah. So if we force them all together, then we're going to be confused. So the Bible is a collection of 66 different books, 40 different writers. So we need to be careful that when we do interpretation, that we first start within the book itself and then extrapolate out to the rest of the Bible. But we don't force what Paul says in Romans about the sons of God in chapter 8. We don't force that on Genesis 6. Why? That's bad theology. It's bad interpretation.
Well, I think that I need to have you back on. I don't know what for, but I'll think of something, because I think you have been, like, honestly, I've had some really good people on for little old me sitting out here in Clearwater, Florida. And for those who have asked too, no, it happened on the east coast of Florida. I guess there was some random flooding. I didn't even know. And I live here. I'm like, oh, sure. Nope, not me. So I looked it up. I guess it was in South Florida. And I am not. I am on the west coast, the pretty coast. But I don't know. I've had some really great people on. But Mondo, even meeting you in Orlando, you're refreshing. You're easy to talk to. you're approachable, and you know your stuff. And that's who I like to be on this podcast, is people who really know what they're talking about. But you've really been a pleasure. It's amazing. And you took time out of your busy schedule to come here. So